Well, they don't really become doctors and engineers because they like to save the planet or because they want to rid people of pain. We want to be doctors and engineers. These are people from third world countries. We have come culturally, historically, to realize that if you don't really have money, life can be very, very difficult. Difficult for you, for your family, for your children, for your parents. You're not going to have very much social mobility, and your self-image is always going to be kind of down there in the pit. And I think because they are, and maybe it's unconscious, I'm not quite sure, but I think if you happen to have come from a culture that has some depth, eventually there's a story that is written in your cultural narrative that will impose itself on your psychology, which is life is tough. Why the hell would you want to be a painter or be a pianist? You can't make any money. And you're also talking about cultures, third world cultures, where people are communal. Uh, because when you're poor, when you have 20 poor people in your clan, everybody needs to help everybody and everybody needs to work to help themselves as well as everybody else. So there's this kind of communal just way of thinking about life. So you don't become an engineer just for yourself. You become an engineer for your father, for your mother, for your brothers and sisters, and ultimately for your own self-image in society. There is also another thing that your parents will go around saying, this is my daughter Gening and she's a doctor. And their status will go up because of you and through you. And that's what it means to be in a communal, tribal environment. So because they know the difficulties of life, they're not going to give you this message of, hippie Jesus Christ, where he says, man does not live by bread alone. Well, that may be so for someone who just has had a lot of food. But for someone who's been starving for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, man does live by bread and only bread, Uh, and I think that saying that Jesus spoke came when he had just eaten a good amount of chicken and rice. His belly was full. And then he was sitting and talking spiritual talk to the Pharisees or the Jews. Hungry people don't talk like that. So yeah, all parents in the Middle East or Asia expect that their parents become doctors and engineers. Nothing wrong with that. But I think expecting a doctor to be intelligent or expecting an engineer to be intelligent, expecting someone who has power to also be charitable, to also be wise, to be insightful. It's like, when I go to the doctor, my assumption is he knows everything about the human body. He knows everything about all the diseases that are in the world. And when I tell him A, he'll tell me, well, here are the medications, go take them, do them, and you'll be fine. But the truth is that's the wrong expectation. It's a 50-year-old guy who went to school for, I don't know, 20 years, has seen maybe 100 patients, and he has a limited knowledge about the human body, about sickness, about prescribing what heals the body and heals the mind. And so, you just kind of live with all the shortcomings that are around you. You have to forgive me again because I don't know if your question is related to Allison's question or Lula's, comment about the happy medium. onto the creative part. There was this woman named Rabi'a. Rabi'a was, Rob in Arabic means fourth. So she was the fourth child of this family who had 8 kids. That's just information, useless information, sorry. So one day, she's a Sufi woman. That's for your woman gender. And there's a book about her, by the way, and all of her sayings. So one day she stands to pray. And Sufis are interesting in the sense that they want their prayers to contain a good amount of intense emotions. They want to stand, pray, weep, be in union with whatever that's out there. So she stands expecting that she's going to be melting, crying, having this really intimate moment with herself and God. And she stands and she's very disappointed because she's not feeling anything. And so she just kind of stands and says to this imaginary thing called God that my heart is not alive. There are two options. I can either give you a prayer that means absolutely nothing. My mouth will move, but my mind will not think about what my tongue is saying. And my heart will not feel what my tongue is saying. If you want, I can say that. If on the other hand, she says to God, you want a prayer that has reflection, that has spirit in it, you have to give me that heart because I can't do it on my own. I think when you're dealing with very, very proficient, creative people, and the way you become proficient is that you do something over and over and over and over again until it becomes part of you. You know, um, sometimes I haven't read a book, I don't know for how long. And because of my involvement with the shed and the deck, I haven't even written. I'm far too exhausted to, put my body down on the chair and focus on writing for more than maybe 5 or 10 seconds. Uh, Also, writing is difficult. So sometimes when I head to the office, I say to myself, okay, Amir, look, you haven't read a book in a couple of decades. You haven't written anything in like 2, 3, 4, 5 months. You haven't even thought about anything significant. What the hell are you going to do when you get to the class? But my investment goes way back, which is I was with Hussein for a number of years. I read a lot of books. I wrote a lot. I thought a lot. And it's like an art that even if you don't practice, you're not going to lose it. It is part of me. So if you happen to be very proficient, the realities of life and this other part of you that you categorize as being creative, they live kind of together harmoniously. And it's like the other day walking to the classroom and saying, listen, I was working downstairs for 9 hours. I don't know what to talk about. I'm far too tired. I'm not really interested. And you don't really care how students think about you. You just know that because you kind of strained your body a little too much, you exhausted your body is going to not let you think. And your body is not going to let you have coherent conversation or coherent ideas or expressions of ideas. Uh, if you happen to be someone like Rabi'a, you've been a Sufi woman for about 20 years, 30 years, you've fasted, you've prayed, you've moved through inspiration, it's okay if you have a day off or 2 days off. That's not going to do much to you. There was a guy named Muhammad Ghazali. Ghazali was a theologian. And he would go around sometimes just buy books because he loved to read books. So one day, as he has all these books being carried in this caravan. This group of thieves come to steal everything that he owns, and he looks at them and says, "Please take everything, but not my books, because all of my wisdom lives inside the books." And the chief of the thieves looks at him and says, "So you're telling me that your wisdom is something that can be stolen?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Then shame on you. Wisdom is something that lives inside you. No one can ever take it from you." And supposedly, his life completely changes. From that point on, he goes and he searches for the sort of knowledge or wisdom that can be found within as opposed to without. And I think when you become someone like him, you will never lose your creativity, even being in the midst of the hustle and bustle of life. It's only when you're not proficient and you go into the world, and the world has a tendency of just destroying whatever creativity you have inside you. But if you are really good, and it may be that I'm not really understanding your question. When you say creativity, sometimes for all of us here, it's spontaneous. You're sitting and you're inspired to write a poem. That's creative. There is nothing wrong with that. But then you have the creativity of Shakespeare. You have the creativity of T.S. Eliot. These are like professionals getting. A professional is not going to lose his or her talent, the ability to express who and what they are, or express what they've observed about life or about themselves. It is only those who are not very proficient, who are governed by inspiration, that they can find a happy medium, that they live in conflict. Sometimes when I'm downstairs and doing mule work, donkey work, Sarah comes out and says, "What happened to your writing? Why don't you go upstairs and write? What is this? Who's going to go downstairs into the shed? No one goes to the shed. Who's going to sit on this deck? No one's going to sit. You're wasting your time." And she's right. At the same time, I do know that there are hundreds, millions of books out there that they're just gathering dust, and my book will be just one of those. I'm not going to expect, great things from this book. There's the Bible, there's the Quran, there are all these great books out there. And all that these books can really do is to kind of create a great amount of misunderstandings and arrogance and violence against women, gender, and religion. So, that's ultimately it. The book lives inside me. If there's anyone interested, they can come and ask me about Rumi. At least the first 34 lines. you know. But I think it is to, it is good for someone to kind of encourage you to sit and write, to use your neurons to make sure that you don't suffer from Alzheimer's later on. It's good to keep your mind fresh. Once something has found a home inside you, something has made a home inside you, you can run away from it. You can try to forget about it. But eventually you'll go back to it. The only conflict that you will suffer is, say, why didn't I go back home sooner or earlier? Why did I have to kind of do all that stuff? But when there is an intense amount of creativity inside you, your inner world is really quite chaotic. It's chaotic, it's authentic, it's passionate, it's honest, it's sincere. It's not governed by the laws of gravity. It's not governed by society. It's just all oozing from your inside. Then your alarm rings and it's 9 o'clock and you have to go to Kaiser. And you sit behind the table and you punch in numbers. And you say, what the hell is this? And I think that's a tragedy. I think if you can somehow find a way to just be in that creative space, and instead of making $100,000 a year, just make 50,000, learn how to live that amount. I think it's a good life. But the idea, and it's something we talked about before, the idea that you can be creative for 5 hours and then you can go sit behind your table and punch in numbers for 10 hours and come home being relatively sane. You can only be sane if you forget. If you forget this other part of you. But the more you remember, it becomes more and more burdensome, where ultimately you have to make a choice. Do you want to do Kaiser or do you want to do this? And you can live with this conflict for a long time until you get to be my age, like 57, 58, 59, 60, where you're far too exhausted, far too tired to kind of figure out which battle you want to get yourself involved in. Say, okay, I'm just going to be creative for 5 hours and then just going to go punch in numbers for 10 hours. And you've made peace. And you've made peace not because you understood anything, because you're tired, you're too old to fight anymore. You've basically given up. There's nothing wrong with it. There is this great story in the Screwtape Letters written by C.S. Lewis. It's a conversation between, I think, the devil and I forget what his cousin or something. And so this man is at a crossroad. He doesn't like himself. He doesn't like his life. He feels a calling. He wants to go to church. And he imagines that churchgoers are people who are slim physically. They're very sincere and honest. They love Jesus Christ. They love praying and fasting. And so he expects to go to church and see all those things. And then he goes, and he can't but be disappointed. These are people who are overweight, sit there and laugh about stupid things and gossip about stupid things. And they have no idea what prayer is. They have no idea who Jesus is. And eventually becomes one of them. And Screwtape tells the devil, and his cousin, the Screwtape, leave those people alone. They're doing our job. As long as they believe that they're good Christians, that's good enough. You should always be aware of people like Socrates, where they keep examining and trying to hammer out parts of them that are contaminated, so sincere and somewhat dishonest. I think when you're young and you have a lot of passion inside you, you can't but be in conflict. You're young and you want to go out there and fly. And the world has only one function, which is to beat you up. Whether it's your parents or your boyfriend or whoever it may be, it doesn't really matter. Chaos doesn't know stability. Gaia can be stable because she's grounded. She doesn't care whether you urinate on Gaia or plant flowers. It takes both of them the same way. Uranus, on the other hand, is very, very different. Doesn't want to come down, doesn't want to get in touch with filth. Just want to, be the sky and just look down and make all these judgments about how ridiculous the earth is and people who walk on earth. Um, when you're young, it's very difficult to occupy the adulthood because it is dry, it's boring, it's dead. And so when you go to, say, a Buddhist workshop and they say, well, the happy medium, when you take a philosophy class and they're talking about Aristotle's The Golden Mean, that don't be an extremist, when you're young, it's stupid. It won't work. You just have to kind of like just wait and wait and wait until you either end up in the forest or you end up in the world. And I think that's the difference between Jesus and Buddha and their mothers is that the mother of the Buddha was told that, listen, your son will either be worldly or he will be otherworldly, but he has a choice. That's not what God told Mary. There is no this worldly, physical worldly for Jesus. He's just made for the other world. And he comes to this world only to baptize it. He doesn't have much of an option. Most of us are not as lucky. We have options, and those options create a good amount of conflict. So, but I'm also, a little temperamentally, I'm somewhat an extremist. It's black and white for me. A happy medium doesn't exist for me. Uh, and it may be because, I'm just greedy that way. When someone, for example, tells me, can you tell me about Plato? I pay attention to the body language. And just in case I find that body language a little dismissive, I won't say anything about Plato. I'll just be quiet and just wait for them. And wait to see if they're going to ask again. I'm still waiting. Yeah, that was like an hour ago. What are you waiting for? You know? So, I had a friend long time ago, since you will no doubt somehow listen to our talk. Uh, I met him when I was in Italy. I think his name was Andrea. A relatively honest, sincere. I mean, sure, all of us have some psychological traumas, but he came here with the expectation that he's going to run into a carbon copy of Gurdjieff. And that's a good expectation, because Gurdjieff is an inspiring character. And when you read his ideas In Search of the Miraculous, I remember I was sitting in Berkeley, and when I had met Jacob Needleman, he said, have you heard of Gurdjieff? I said, no. You have never heard of Gurdjieff? I said, no. And you're a Sufi? So I didn't say I'm a Sufi, but I just haven't heard of Gurdjieff. He says, well, go to some bookstore and buy this book called In Search of the Miraculous. said, "Well, can you write this down? Because I don't know how to spell miraculous." So, and he has a great handwriting. So he writes it down. I go to Moe's, and then I go to Shakespeare, which was across the street. Shakespeare had the book for like $12.99. It was used, and Moe's had it for I don't know, $10. So I got the cheaper one. So I go to a coffee shop. It's about 8:39 at night, and I'm reading this book and say, "Oh my God, this is incredible! This is like I found my Quran in English. You know, this is like another version of Daughter of Fire, but it's instead of a woman student, it's a male student." And I remember going to Needleman the following day saying, "So, are there like places or groups where they talk about this stuff?" Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, but I had the organization in America, in Canada, in Australia, in England. Yo, look at you. How could you? I mean, you look like this. Yeah, but so he says, if you're interested, here's the address. Come there. People ask like great questions. I went to the gathering once, and their questions were quite childish and idiotic. But Andrea, that very much like me, probably read Insert the Miraculous in Italian, and he's inspired. And someone tells him, probably that there is this place in California somewhere where they do the movements, where they have a community very much like the one that Gurdjieff have created. Of course, you come there with a great expectation. You pack up, you're inspired, you're creative. So I'm going to go there and do A, B, C, D. But you're young. You haven't really processed this thoroughly. You assume that the fire that lived inside Gurdjieff is the same fire that now lives inside Bob, who's heading this organization in Grass Valley. And you want to believe it's the same fire, but it's not. But it's your own desires and expectations and wants and needs. And time passes. And remember, it's a difficult thing. It's not just an investment of a year or two. You have a kid who leaves his culture, his country, for a carrot. And when you make such a sacrifice at such a young age, where else can you go? You stay there, hoping that your own intuition is wrong, hoping that one day, this man named Robert or whoever he may be, is going to give you, the essence of Gurdjieff's teachings and movements and all that. And little by little, you lose your faith. Little by little, you lose your trust. Little by little, the inspiration that lived inside you goes away. The flame basically just dies. And you've become what Gurdjieff warned you, which was you become a machine. You do everything mechanically. Your conversations are mechanical. Movements are mechanical. Even when you look at your teacher who's talking, sitting over there, even he looks like a machine. There is nothing inspiring about any of this stuff, and you begin to kind of have conflict on the inside, sometimes to the point where you say, maybe at night when everybody's asleep, I should just pack my stuff and just leave. And you say, well, I'm like 35, go away. At least here I have a few friends. I don't need that much money, I can survive. I didn't go to school, I don't have any degrees. And so you become exactly, the sort of an entity that Gurdjieff just hated. There is zero value to you. You have zero creativity. You become a complete There are no alarm clocks inside that wake you up and say, listen, go back to being human. You're pathetic right now. And you kept getting beaten over and over and over again. All of a sudden, you look yourself in the mirror and you're like 40 years old. Uh, and temperamentally, you are, in Gurdjieffian typology, you're number 5, which is an intellectual. So you just read and you just read and you just read and you talk about the things you read. And you have a wing of number 6, which is there's a good amount of sarcasm inside you. There's a good amount of pride inside you because you read so much. And you understand, but you understand incorrectly. You make fun of everything. You don't take yourself seriously. You don't take anybody seriously. And you kind of see yourself living in this desert. And you look for some stakes. You've made yourself a tiny little hut in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing that's really valuable, meaningful, but you survive it nevertheless. And that's, the evolution of being young, being inspired, and then the inspiration getting beaten down and not getting what you expected. Then when you get to be 60, it becomes so hard on the inside. Nothing can really move you. There are no books to read, no lectures to listen to, no one really to talk to. You already know, how your friends are going to be, what they're going to talk about, and you have zero interest in them. And all of life becomes just one big lie, and yet you have to live in it and survive. No, I mean, there are a couple of things. First, I think it's wise not to make authors into someone who's omniscient, who's all knowing. He may have written the book Stranger with the main character, Mousseau, and he may only have injected a few perspectives about Mousseau's character, Mousseau's life, the meaning of what it means to be human. It may be that you may read the book and you may come up with perspectives or versions of this particular character in a way that Camus never imagined. First, um, Rousseau gets the news that his mom has died. It's a great thing not to feel pain from some of the things that, when your mom lost her mom, apparently they were very, very close. So when her mom passed, she just lost it. She went crazy a little bit. Now compare that to Rousseau. Okay, so this is a guy who doesn't know how to feel. This is a guy who's lost certain human qualities. Well, good for him. He doesn't go nuts. He doesn't fall apart. He doesn't feel despair. He doesn't feel pain. I mean, that's a great freedom. I mean, in some ways, he's like the Buddha. He's completely detached from the world. He's detached from himself. And I mean, what is really Buddhism? Buddhism it's a fight against being a human being with emotions. Because attachment are emotionally based. If you're not attached, you don't have emotions. They can't hurt you. Pain is an emotion. If you're not attached, you can't experience pain. And that's what it is. And Rousseau is that, you know. But, Camus is not writing about Rousseau in that sense. He's looking at what's happening in the 19th and 20th century. And it's a difficult period. It's a difficult period because 19th century, 20th century, you feel as if the past 5,000 years of human inventions, human progress in things physical, in things emotional, in things intellectual, spiritual, the 19th, 20th century has just destroyed all of it. We have, human beings have, I don't know if religion is true, if there's a God or not, but, it has taken a good amount of human genius to give birth to faith into something that's invisible. It's a great thing. Then it's a great thing to create a scientific revolution where it promises factories, it promises medicine, it promises healing of sorts. The Renaissance, it gives people hope that we are talking about the rebirth of culture, rebirth of civilization, rebirth of the human mind, rebirth of brand new perspectives about who and what you are as a human being and what you can do in this short few hours of your life. This is great. Now you have the freedom to move around and experiment and explore things and invent things, create things without feeling that God is up there judging you and punishing you. You can be very expressive. And then what happens? You have World War I. All the countries get involved. Millions of people are dead. What happens to science? What happens to evolution? What happens to religion? The idea of compassion and kindness and forgiveness. They all go away. And all of a sudden, the 20th century human being looks at the scientific revolution and says, so all that science was only for one purpose, to create bullets, to invent machine guns, so that we could destroy each other quicker, And then also comes about, at least in this country and some of the other Western countries, the 1915 or 16 through all the way almost to 1950. First you get a depression, then a few years later after World War I, you get World War II. What are you left with? Whatever stability life had given you, whatever stability human beings tried to create through religion, through philosophy, through science, because they all gave hope to something. And secularism ultimately said there is no stability in life. Look at the crisis that happened in 2005, I think. And you have all these hardworking, good, nice, kind people, saving their money little by little, buying a house behind closed doors. Within a matter of a couple of months, everybody lost their jobs. A lot of people lost their houses. That's devastating. What can you trust? What can you depend on anymore? Nothing. And I think in some ways, if you look at Rousseau, the main character of The Stranger, within the context of everything we just talked about, good for him. He's a man who doesn't feel. He doesn't believe in marriage. He doesn't believe in love. He doesn't believe in saving a dog or a cat. He doesn't even believe that human life has any value. And that's the creation of modernity. There is nothing to believe in anymore. And if there is nothing to believe in, then you're not going to have any emotional attachment to anything. And no emotional attachment means no dependency. You are, to some extent, in a strange way, you're very self-reliant. I don't want to marry you, but if you want to marry me, I'll marry you. I don't really love you. I don't even know what it is, but if you love me, fine. I can love you too, I suppose, in some strange way. You know, I mean, some, guy looks at him and says, I'm a pimp. I like to be your friend. And like a child who doesn't know right from wrong, good from bad, he says, yeah, we can be friends. Musa is profoundly innocent, you know. Yusuf is 5, Sophia is 6. If I was to die tonight, they have only 5 years of experience. It's not going to haunt them for the rest of their life, you know. If on the other hand, you know, they were 20 and we had 20 good years, it could devastate them. Murso doesn't suffer from any of those things. And I suppose the book in some ways is trying to tell us, look, here's a guy who just lives life, doesn't reflect, doesn't feel, doesn't know good from bad, doesn't care. And then what you have is Albert Camus, someone who thinks, someone who reflects. And he wants to poison Musa. Camus does. Camus is giving us a certain definition of what it means to be human. That don't be a product of modernity. Don't be an unthinking, unreflective zombie walking around, unattached, unfeeling, unreflective. And he wants to tell us that, well, reflect. When you reflect, you begin to feel bad about who you are, what you are. There is a scene in the book where, he's being tried because he's killed someone. And I think it's the prosecutor who says, we've tried this guy and I haven't found an ounce in him that's human. That there is something profoundly deficient about this kid. And it's only near the end of the book when he is just punished repeatedly, where all of a sudden there's a breakthrough, where he begins to think and reflect, and through that he feels bad. And he's thrown out of the Garden of Eden. He feels, you know. And in some ways, you can play with these ideas in so many different ways. Is it better to just live life, or is it better to reflect and live life? Is it better to feel, or is it to be unattached so that you could be protected from intense feelings that could, ultimately lead you to therapist's office? It's great. He goes to the funeral for his mom, and he finds a nice, young, attractive woman. Have you been to funerals? People sit there and cry and cry and cry and cry, and they go home depressed. Good for Musa. He goes there and he finds himself a nice companion. I think however way you think about life, it's problematic. There is no escape from it.